It was spring of 1998, and I, a then 15-year-old female, was a high school sophomore. I had an argument with my mother late in the evening and decided to leave the house and take a walk around town to clear my head after. I walked from my suburban neighborhood about 2 miles to downtown and looped around to walk home again. It must have been around midnight, on my way back and about a half-mile from home, when I noticed a pickup truck with a shell on the back pass me by slowly a few times along a main street with no other cars around. Once I realized it was the same vehicle, after the third time passing me, the primal fear set in. Maybe the driver was lost? No. I felt my heart racing, my body went numb. When the truck passed me a fourth time, it didn't stop, but I could tell whoever was driving it was definitely scoping me out. It drove off again, but I heard it turn around once more over the crest in the hill as I was walking up. I ran for my life behind a building on the main street and into a neighborhood where I chose to trespass into a residential property to avoid this person in the truck who was following me. I heard the truck drive by with the engine roaring, accelerating down this small residential street as I hid in the bushes of someone's yard, terrified. The truck began scouting this neighborhood. When it turned onto another street away from me, I ran down the block further towards home until I was safe, but shaken by the experience. A little over a year later, a local man called Rex Krebs was arrested and charged with the abduction, rape, and unaliving of 2 young women from the same part of town where I had my experience being followed. One of the murder locations being about 4 blocks from where I hid in the bush while being followed. The newspaper ran a huge story on the case and included the article's photo, the killer's pickup truck that he used to abduct his 2 victims. And what do you know? It was the same truck that was following me that one night. It just goes to show how close I was from probably ending up dead, all because of an argument with my mother. I had just finished my courses of the year, and summer was right around the corner, so it meant that it was time to catch up with some of my friends. On this particular occasion, it was Nathan. Nathan was my best friend at the time, and we would sometimes spend months without seeing each other, but when we did hang out, we would always do the same thing. Go get some snacks, catch up over coffee before sunset, then walk around town until around 9 p.m. and call it a day. This time, though, nothing felt unusual. From the moment I saw him, something in my stomach just dropped. It wasn't him per se. We were on good terms, but something about hanging out that day felt off. Right as I greeted him with a handshake and went to our usual spot for coffee. We got there and things went by the books. I shook it off as me being nervous because I hadn't seen him in a long time. That was of course until Nathan mentioned that he felt like things around us were weird. Another drop in my stomach, but I kept my cool, trying not to sound too paranoid or something, but I guess I couldn't help it. "You feel it too?" I asked. He nodded. He said that he couldn't pinpoint what was wrong, but it was like our surroundings were odd, even hostile, even when there was nothing to fear. Was this some sort of shared paranoia? Was the end of the year getting to us? We didn't know, but we were sure that it was the first time we felt something like that. We finished our coffee and felt like maybe having a walk that wasn't going to be our best idea. Maybe we should call it a day now and just go back to our homes while there was still light. At that moment, my dad called me and asked if I could find out the price of a phone he was thinking about buying. So we were going to the store. In my mind, I kept thinking, yeah, I'll ask about this and then we'll split. But no, for some reason, and even after what we felt, decided to do our long walk until dark. This was my last chance to turn back before it all went down. We used to walk around this boulevard that wasn't really a dangerous area during a normal weekend. It used to be filled with teenagers and young adults sitting on the grass division in the middle, drinking or smoking and listening to music. It was a Saturday at 8:30 p.m, completely empty. I like to think that it was my last warning. As we passed a corner, I noticed two other guys who were coming from it as we crossed the street and kept walking straight. I looked over my shoulder, and I noticed that they were behind us. They were probably around our age, maybe older. Now, something that doesn't normally trigger my red flags, but did with these two. What set me off is that they weren't talking like us. They were dead silent. Secondly, their pace was off. They weren't trying to pass us, but they didn't stay way behind either. They were keeping distant. We were completely alone on that street, the four of us, and as we approached the end of the boulevard, which goes down into a big park, I warned Nathan, "Hey, these two behind us, they might be onto something." Nathan looked over his shoulder and then back at me and said, "Want to cross the street just to be sure?" I nodded, and we did so. We crossed the grass area in the middle and onto the other side and kept walking forward down the street. And that was when I saw it, and when my heart, gut, and every organ in my body knew before my brain could process it. The guys on the other side upped their pace. One of them grabbed something from a fanny bag he had on his chest and went ahead of his friend. Before I could react, the guy crossed the street in front of us and said, "Boys, keep it quiet or we'll shoot you both dead," as his partner approached us too. My vision went blurry. I couldn't see their faces anymore. All I could see was that they were in front of us, threatening to end our lives, and seemingly armed. I froze. My entire life flashed before me. My parents, my girlfriend, the dog we had just rescued that I was happy to see every time I got home. What was the last thing I had said to any of them? And knowing that I would probably never see them again. In a panic, I gave one of them my phone and raised my hand, but Nathan managed to snap and ran away while I stayed frozen, with those two knobheads threatening us and telling him to come back. It wasn't until he yelled "run" that I snapped to and ran towards him. I tripped not far from where I started, and I heard from behind me, "Shoot him now!" And I thought, that's it, that's how I go. But I gathered my strength and got up. I kept running, expecting to hear a gunshot behind me and fall to my death, but it never rang. We ran all the way back. I was finally able to talk again, but all I could muster was, "Help, please," at the top of my lungs. We ran a few blocks until we stopped from exhaustion. Nathan had lost his glasses back at the boulevard and wanted to go back, because he couldn't see without them and getting a new pair was very expensive. But I refused, and told him I would stay here and wait for help or the police. But eventually he convinced me and we went back carefully, to the places where our lives changed forever. Lucky enough he found them, and those two guys were long gone. You know, I feel that everything that happened before that horrific moment was some kind of warning sign trying to stop us from going there. Hell, when the dust settled and people started showing up in the boulevard, the same kind of people I described earlier, we came across a woman who was waiting for her husband to get out of work. And upon hearing what happened, she offered us a ride to my house and we accepted. When we got there, I hugged my mum like I'd never done so in my life, and was so thankful for being able to do so. Needless to say, the 5th of November changed me forever. I know that it could have happened on any date, any hour or anywhere, but it would never be a normal day for me again. Nathan and I drifted apart, not because of this, but our friendship was never really the same afterwards, especially with me refusing to go around these areas at night, especially if we were walking. I will never ever ignore that feeling again, and if your gut tells you that something is off, trust me, it is. I had one of the most terrifying stalking experiences 12 years ago. I was an 18-year-old female at the time, and The Great Gatsby movie with Leonardo DiCaprio had been released. Being really young, inexperienced, and very naive about how to remain safe with unwanted attention, I made every mistake in the book with a guy who was 23 at the time that started stalking me. I had just graduated high school, and took a job at a health food store in my downtown area. It was my first customer service job. The owner was a big hippie who was easy to work with and flexible with hours. At first, I worked different shifts, eventually taking the afternoon to closing hours. Due to how small the store was, I was alone without other co-workers, only our owner sporadically dropping in to grab items off the shelf for her personal use, then leaving after about half an hour or so. As a side note, our store was situated next to the building that had subsidized housing for those recently released from incarceration or lower income. The evening/nighttime hours were risky for young women to be out without a male escort. Every restaurant in the downtown area had staff that escorted girls to their cars, as it was common to be followed with assaults happening after dark. I was on edge during closing, but felt some reassurance, as I had parked immediately outside our back exit, just a few feet from the door. But I was in the store closing out the register, cleaning and locking up every night alone. The front of the store was where the cash register was set up, but your back was to the large window that was right next to the sidewalk. The register faced the inside of the store, and it wasn't uncommon for me to feel people watching me and catch creepy guys looking at me through the window right behind where I was standing. Again, young and inexperienced, I didn't voice my fears or report the randos that would be a foot away watching me, only separated by the glass window. I picked up a shift during the summer farmers market in the morning. It was a great day. I was so happy to work in the morning and have a higher flow of customers, and one guy called Cam came into the store with a brochure for a local event at a spiritual center in the downtown area. I was pleasant, smiling, and got permission for us to post it on our register. He was obviously high, nothing crazy, and looked chill. You could tell he was in his own world. We spoke for maybe 5 minutes, and I didn't think much of the encounter and moved on with my day. On my next shift, Cam comes into the store. He struck up a conversation and was trying to keep my attention. Again, working in the afternoon when we had maybe 2 or 3 people come in before close, he just hung out right at the register. I was trying to give hints that I needed to focus on work, but he would just follow me around the store while commenting on how gorgeous my legs were and that he thought I had been an angel the last time he saw me. He kept telling me he had a spiritual awakening because I had shown him interest in how nice I was, insisting I was flirting and that the sun behind my head made my hair glow like a halo. Again, young and not experienced with guys, I was equally creeped out, but also a little flattered because I'd never had that kind of attention. I thanked him for the compliments, didn't call out that they were inappropriate, just made the same excuse that I needed to focus, and walked away. Per usual, he just shadowed me everywhere I went, watching me but not really talking anymore. I was getting really freaked out. I let him know he was loitering and needed to leave unless he was there to shop. Given how pricey the items were, I figured it would deter him. He ended up using his food stamps to buy 1 soda or piece of candy every hour, maybe $3 spent an hour, and he'd make the excuse he was a customer. I went to the bathroom to at least get some privacy. My boss had seen him hanging out in the store before but never commented. I called her and told her that I was getting scared by this guy, letting her know he was making an excuse to stay by buying 1 cheap item and insisting he was a customer through the whole of my shift. I really thought she'd give me support and come to the store. She was a self-proclaimed feminist that espoused consent and boundaries, so I got major whiplashed when she defended his presence. She told me the store was in the red and on the brink of needing to close. Because he was spending any money, I shouldn't try to push him out the store. I tried arguing that he wasn't generating significant income, and she just doubled down that money was money, and then insisted I was overthinking it, and Cam was just a kind soul that had found a similar soul bond with me, and that created positive energy in the store. What the hell? So, there was a roadblock there. All I could do was carry on. The idea of quitting didn't even cross my mind, being my first job. I was worried it would look bad if I left only after a few months, and it was really hard to find a local position that was flexible with school hours, and I would be starting my first semester at the local college soon. Things slowly escalated. Cam started bringing me flowers every day. He would leave long notes confessing his love and insisting we were soulmates. Then he'd randomly play The Great Gatsby soundtrack. He would go on and on telling me that he was Gatsby and I was his Daisy. We were destined to be together, and that my denial of our bond was just like Gatsby's attempt to get Daisy. We were living out the movie, but our ending would be the coming together of souls wrapped in passion. He had this crazed look in his eyes every time he brought it up. Then he started just calling me Daisy. Any time another customer would come in, he would get angry and jealous that I ignored him and walked away. He started calling himself my bodyguard and told me it was his duty to beat up anyone that looked at me wrong or made a pass at me that would be a threat to our love. Again, I want to emphasize that I was so stupid for not quitting this job or telling anyone about this. It was an understatement that I was a complete dumbass for not making police reports, documenting things, or creating boundaries, leaving my job, or telling my friends, parents, or co-workers. For a few weeks he didn't show up. I thought there would finally be a break or he lost interest. Then he showed back up, told me he was hospitalized. Great. The same routine started all over again. Then one day I get a text from an unknown number. It was Cam. Not only did he get my number from a coworker who he lied to saying he had a new phone and lost my number, but he did a reverse search and found my address. He didn't have transportation and I was on the other side of town. We didn't have a bus system and it was too far to walk. As far as I know, he never came to my house, but I'm sure he did, and I just wasn't aware. I didn't block his number. Again, that was so dumb, but honestly I was so scared because he knew where I lived and was so entrenched in this idea that we were bound to be together. I thought things would escalate more. I either ignored his texts or made dumb excuses for not responding. I would be curt and he wouldn't take the hint. When I started my semester at school, it got worse again. He formed a group of friends and told me he'd introduce them. First, he wanted me to go to his apartment. When I insisted I wouldn't, he brought them to the store. I stupidly thought they were nice people, but they sided with him saying that he was a really nice guy and that I should give him a chance. Told me he was just being melodramatic and liked playing out fantasies, but that he wasn't a bad guy. A few days later, Cam told me he was concerned for my safety with the darker evenings. He told me he'd have his friends posted outside the front and back of the store to make sure I was safe. And they did, and it was freaky as hell. Now, growing up in a household of abuse, I didn't register the damage of this situation. I was accustomed to bad things happening to me, and was still stuck in a compliant/submissive response mode. This behavioral pattern didn't make me fight the setup. They started bringing more deliveries of gifts from me to Cam, and the 5 of them now loitered in the store with Cam during my shifts, each of them buying one thing each hour to remain customers. It was getting too scary. 6 guys in the store, me, alone, young female, exits being blocked by them as they insisted they were my bodyguards who would watch the doors. My nightly habit became kicking them out, locking the store and finishing my work in the dark so they couldn't see me inside, and then stay in the building for 2 hours so they'd go away. It worked for a week. Then one night I stepped out the door and all of them were either leaning against the wall by the exit door or leaning on my car smoking and drinking. Cam came and tried to hug me with his buddies whooping in the background. He reeked of weed and alcohol, and honestly I thought they were going to grab me and force me into the apartment. I made my car alarm go off, and it scared them enough that I was able to jump in, lock the doors, and floor out of the parking lot. I didn't give notice, I just told the owner I was done, and didn't tell anyone about what happened. Cam kept trying to text me, told me I was denying our destiny and wasn't going to give up on us. I stopped responding. Then I blocked his number. Then he'd get new numbers and text again. His texts got more threatening. As I ignored him, I started hearing cars drive by at odd hours of the night, and he would text me to let me know he was still my dedicated protector and make sure I was safe. It was obvious one of his buddies was giving him rides to snoop at my house. All of a sudden, it all stopped. Radio silence, and I was so relieved. 6 months went by with nothing. Then, there was a random phone call from another unknown number. I was in group chats with other students for projects and thought it was one of them calling me, but it was Cam. He told me he violated his parole and was in jail the last 6 months. He had thought of me every day. I was his daisy, and he was going to come for me. We would finally be together, and he'd prove to me that we had an undeniable love, that I would love his male member, and already was fantasizing about it while in jail. As you could imagine, I was just pale as a ghost and speechless. All I could think was to fake a story about going abroad for study in 2 weeks. He started screaming at me for running away from our connection. He said he'd find me and come after me no matter where I went. I just hung up the phone, trashed it, and got a new phone with a new number, deleted my Facebook, and finally moved to a large city an hour away. I had to upend my entire life because of this worthless piece of trash, and I was so inexperienced and naive. I made so many mistakes. I was just glad the worst-case scenarios never played out, and it was a steep learning curve that taught me how to protect myself in the future. That wasn't the last of my weird encounters. One guy at college who transferred to the larger university from our local college got a similar fixation on following me to the larger campus. He had a fetish for being stalked. He would find me in the school union and talk about how hot it would be if he found me going through his trash in the middle of the night. Thankfully, it was a huge campus and I got friends enlisted to watch out for him and let me know where to avoid. But Christ, there are so many creeps out there, and it really sucks being a woman. I was in Barcelona with a few friends, and like most trips, the night started off completely normal and harmless. We had spent the day doing the usual tourist stuff, and by the time night rolled around, we were already a few drinks in and just looking for somewhere casual to keep things going. We ended up in this small, very local bar tucked away from the main streets. It wasn't sketchy at first glance, but somewhat dimly lit, and filled with regulars who clearly all knew each other. The bartender took an interest in us pretty quickly, probably because we were outsiders and foreign, and started chatting with us while pouring drinks. At first, it felt like good luck. He was talkative and friendly and kept the drinks coming. We were joking around, trying to piece together conversations through broken Spanish and English, and it felt really good. That's when he told us about another bar he liked, somewhere better and more fun. He said he'd take us there himself once he finished his shift. Looking back, that should have been the moment just to say no, and we were good, but we didn't. By the time he closed up, my two friends were a lot more drunk than I was, and I was just buzzed enough to go along without really questioning anything. We stepped outside with him, he flagged down a taxi, and we all piled in together like it was the most normal thing in the world. At first, the drive didn't feel strange. It was just city streets passing, lights, the usual late-night traffic. But after a while, I started to notice how long we'd been driving. The buildings started to thin out, the lighting changed. It slowly stopped feeling like we were just heading to another bar nearby. I leaned forward and asked how far this place was, but he didn't answer. He just laughed and said something to the driver in Spanish, who laughed as well. There was something about the way they laughed that didn't feel like a joke I was in on. It felt like I'd missed something important, or worse, that I wasn't supposed to understand it. I looked out the window again, and now it was undeniable. We were leaving the city. The streets were darker and more spaced out, and there were stretches where there was almost nothing around us. We stopped at a red light, and without thinking about it, I shoved the door open and physically pushed my two friends out the car, telling them to run. They stumbled, confused, not fully understanding the situation, but followed my lead. Once I got right out behind them and slammed the door, we just moved. The taxi didn't follow us and just drove off, and we were standing there in the middle of somewhere we didn't recognize with no real sense of where we were. The roads were mostly empty. And then, we got lucky. Another taxi came down the road and we flagged it down. The driver stopped, rolled down his window and immediately looked confused, and we piled in and began explaining where we needed to go. We told him where we'd come from and he looked genuinely surprised and slightly concerned and asked how we ended up there. When we told him the story, he shook his head and explained that we were further away than we should have been, especially from where we started. He was actually on his way home and done for the night, but after hearing our story agreed to take us back into the city anyway. We never found out where that first taxi was taking us, and maybe it was nothing, but I personally think they were in on something and wanted to get 3 drunk women whisked away to somewhere to do who knows what to them, or maybe even trafficked. I'm glad I never found out what. Be careful with your drinks while abroad, ladies. For context, my best friend and I are both from London, but her family on her dad's side is from Ireland, so she goes there every summer for the entire summer. Last summer, I went to go and stay with her for 2 weeks at her grandfather's house. Her grandfather lives in rural, like proper rural Ireland. The town is at least a 40-minute drive away, and his house is the only building within the area. It backs onto a massive forest and faces onto a lake. It's really quite beautiful, but that's beside the point. My best friend's granddad, brother, aunt, and dad were going to the pub one evening. They invited us, which of course was a tempting offer, but we declined, as we were excited at the prospect of having the house to ourselves. So, we decided to have a chill evening in and basically play house. Of course, if you've been to Ireland, you know that a quick pint is anything but quick, and her family had been gone for some time at this point, which was at least a few hours. It was approaching 10 p.m. We were watching a movie in her living room when we heard a knock on the door. We reckoned maybe it was her family who'd forgotten their keys, so we went to answer. Her grandfather's front door led into the conservatory, which then led to the actual front door of the house, so we made it into the conservatory door expecting her family, but instead there was a man at the door. Slightly confused, we kind of looked at him, waiting for him to say something, during which I had to take in his appearance. There was something off about him, to say the least. He looked insane, bizarrely alert, and yet slightly scary. I can't quite explain it adequately. He said his car had broken down, and he needed to use the phone to call someone to pick him up. I looked out, but couldn't see a car at all, and said something to the effect of, "Where's your car?" He responded by explaining that it had broken down about 30 minutes down the road and had walked and walked until he finally fell upon this house. Given that, as I explained prior, my friend's granddad lived in a fairly remote area, so this was plausible. With a slight hesitation, my friend passed him her phone and said he could use it to call, and waited on the doorstep. He didn't accept the offer. Instead, he just kind of ignored it and started asking if there were any adults or parents in the house. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt and assumed he was asking this as maybe he felt more comfortable sharing his predicament with adults rather than 2 teenage girls. We didn't know if we should tell him if we were alone or not, because we would usually know better, but given the situation, we explained they were out but be back soon. That's when he started to look past us and into the house itself, and began insisting that we let him into the house, as he wanted to use the landline. At this point, we were more than suspicious, because if he wanted to call someone, why not just use my friend's phone? He was erratic, continuously insisting that we let him in. At that point, my friend said he could either use her mobile or leave, but beyond that, there was nothing more we could do for him. He insisted he come into the house, so we just shut the door on him and locked it, then locked the door to the actual house. Freaked out, we sat in her living room trying to peep out the window and see if he had gone. He lingered for a bit, looking into the windows to try and find another way in. But then we saw him leave, though we couldn't make out in which direction he had gone. We were scared as hell. To add fuel to the fire, my friend explained that the nearby town was pretty small, and everyone in the area pretty much knew each other. She had never seen him in his life, which scared her the most, as she was well acquainted with the entire town by now. We contemplated calling her dad, but since it had been about 30 minutes with no disruption, we just left it and continued on with our night. Later on, her dog was getting restless, and her family was still out, so he let her into the back garden. After about 5 minutes, we heard her barking, but it was too dark to see what she was barking at, so we put it down to more than likely being a goat, because that was usually the case. We called her in and went about our night. We realized her family probably wouldn't be back until the early hours, and instead of waiting for them, we decided to head for bed. I went into the kitchen, which is in the back of the house, to get some water, when I heard someone shaking the handle on the back door, trying to get in. The thing is, it's a really old house, so I didn't exactly put all my faith into the door holding up against the weight of what I suspected to be a grown man. I screamed bloody murder, and my friend ran down the stairs. At this point, he was banging on the door like his life depended on it, and I swear to God, I felt my heart fall out my butthole. My friend shouted back that she was going to call the police, which was a lie as she'd taken her phone upstairs, but she thought it could deter him. Luckily, this seemed to scare him off. He stopped banging. We heard his footsteps retreat further and further away until we could no longer hear them. We were frozen in fear and couldn't even speak to each other. Then we heard the front door open and pretty much thought that was it for us. On instinct, my friend grabbed a knife and we hid in the pantry. You can only imagine our relief when we heard her dad calling out for us saying they were back. We were absolutely dazed, and I'm sure they could tell. So we frantically asked them, "Did you see a car on your way here, a broken down one?" They responded that they didn't, and I swear to God I defecated myself there and then. So to the strange man who tried to break into my best friend's granddad's house at night, let's never meet again. I used to work as a supervisor for a janitorial company, and a couple of times a week I'd be assigned to a middle school to clean the hallway floors and the gymnasium. They had this big floor scrubbing machine, basically a Zamboni for tile, and once I got the hang of it I could finish my route pretty fast. Most nights I had the entire school to myself. When I wrap up early, I'd usually head to the library, sit in the back by the big windows and eat my dinner while I read. It was quiet in a way you don't really get during the day, with just the hum of the building and the echo of my footsteps. So the morning after one of my shifts there, my phone rang. It was school security asking me to come in. Their tone alone told me it wasn't routine. When I pulled into the lot, I saw a police car parked out front, and my stomach dropped. Inside, they started with basic questions. Did you notice anything unusual last night? Did you see anyone around? Stuff like that. I told them no. Honestly, I rarely noticed much at all. I usually had headphones in while I worked, the machine droning underneath whatever I had listening to. They then brought me into the security office and pulled up a camera feed. On the screen was footage from the previous night. There I was, riding the scrubber down one of the main hallways, and not far from me, close enough that if I'd have turned my head, I might have seen movement, someone was slipping into the classroom, clear as day. They had broken in while I was right there. They showed me the rest of the footage. I stayed in the building for another 2 hours after that, completely unaware. Nothing was stolen and nothing was disturbed, and then came the part that still weirds me out. There's no footage of them leaving. No sign of the door they used being opened again. Security and police had to sweep the entire school from top to bottom, every classroom, every storage room, every stairwell. They never told me if they found anything or anyone, and I never got any follow-up. All I know is that someone was in that building with me the whole time, close enough to hear the machine whirring down the halls, and I had absolutely no idea. I'm not sure if I was in any danger, but it's an unsettling thought, because who knew what kind of intentions they had, why they were there to begin with, or what they'd have done with me if I was inconveniencing what they were planning to do. I am a female of 21 years and work in the hospitality industry, specifically doing graveyard shifts, usually from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I've seen and dealt with some of the most insane experiences, and at this point could probably write a book. But this particular experience was one that was the most frightening. I was brought up to be caring, empathetic, and understanding. These core values mean a lot to me, and I live by them. On numerous occasions, I've been told that constantly having this mentality can lead me to being targeted by people with ill intentions, and I didn't believe that. It's nice to be nice after all. But in hindsight, after everything that's happened, I've learned to be a bit more skeptical. Usually on these graveyard shifts, there were 2 of us in the building at all times, and when we finish our work, we're basically free to sit down and relax for the remainder of our shift, or at least until the morning manager arrived at roughly 6 a.m. So, I did just that. Finished my tasks, and sat down in the main area of the building to have a late night snack and watch some reels on my phone, as you do. My co-worker decided he would take a nap, as it was roughly 3 a.m. at this point and nobody was around. Fine by me. About 20 minutes passed, when I heard a commotion near the bar area. Obviously I looked up from my phone, only to meet the eyes of this man of about 40, standing at the bar counter. This wasn't unusual. Oftentimes people would come down and grab some water or a smoke before heading back to bed. I thought nothing of it, and went back to doom scrolling on my phone. Sorry, excuse me. I let out a sigh, thinking to myself, what could this man possibly want from me at 3:30 a.m? I stood up and asked if he was okay, and apologized for being on my phone, hoping he wouldn't complain to my manager in the morning. He responded, but I couldn't quite pick up what he was saying. I walked over to the bar and kindly asked him to repeat himself, apologizing for not hearing him. Is it okay if I have some water? He was shaking, almost nervous, soft-spoken, and honestly non-threatening, especially seeing as he was about 6 foot tall and I'm only 5 foot tall. Of course, I said, and went to walk away when he stopped me. I'm sorry. Is it okay if I talk to you for a while? My mum's dying in hospital, and I can't sleep. Looking back, I'm kicking myself for not making up some excuse about needing to do work, but I agreed to stay and talk with him. Stupid empathy. He asked if I smoked, and I did, so I said yes. Then he asked me to step outside to smoke and chat, to which I stupidly agreed. We spoke about his mum, and I tried my best to comfort him. I had just recently had someone pass away, so this topic of conversation hit particularly hard. He thanked me for being so kind and continued to talk about his life, how he used to be homeless, but he moved in with his sister and got back on his feet, and that they were both staying here due to the circumstances, but were not from this city. I listened and occasionally responded by nodding. It was a polite conversation, but then something changed. Are there cameras out here? I wouldn't want you to get in trouble for being out here. How this didn't register in my mind as a red flag is unbelievable. How gullible can you be? Anyway, thankfully I didn't respond with yes or no. I just assured him I wouldn't be in trouble for smoking outside. And yet he seemed disappointed with my answer. I presume because he didn't get any information about where the cameras were placed. The conversation kept getting weirder and creepier. None of this I realized. I just saw a sad man needing a friend. Eventually, some form of fight or flight activated in my brain. I told him I was cold and I was going in. Come, let me give you a hug, it'll warm you up. What the hell? At this point I'm creeped out, but I'm thinking maybe he's just bad at picking up on social cues or something, so I respectfully declined and walked inside. He followed. He asked if he could grab a coffee and sit with me for a while, and me being me, and on the verge of a panic attack, and not wanting to get on this guy's bad side, I agreed. We sat there, and he continued to ask odd questions. Did I have kids? Did I want kids? If I had a boyfriend? I told him I had a fiancé, which was a lie, and he asked if I loved him. He went on to say, I mean no harm in asking these questions. You're just so beautiful. At this point, my brain was screaming at me to get out of this situation. I had to think quickly. Come and sit next to me. I won't bite. Hell no. I quickly made up the excuse that I had to get the area ready for the morning and that my manager would be showing up any minute. At the same time, my co-worker woke from his nap and passed by to get a coffee. That startled the man and he stood up before saying, Tell your mum I was asking for her, forcing a hug, and left to go to his room. Oh my god. He was pretending to be a family friend so that my co-worker wouldn't be suspicious of him. I stood there in shock, not even able to speak. My brain was still trying to process what exactly the hell just happened. I kept quiet, helping my co-worker set up for the morning as it was now 5:30 a.m., and I was dealing with this man for 2 hours. I sat down at 5:30 and waited for my manager to show up so I could finally go home, hoping that man wouldn't come back before I had to leave. Wishful thinking. He showed up behind me out of nowhere. I think I'll go to the shops. I'm out of smokes. Okay, why did I need to know this? I kept silent before he asked me for my pen, which I gave him, and he walked off again. He returned 5 minutes later and gave me back my pen. I wrote a note for you. He stood so close to me and then dropped a piece of cardboard behind my back and walked away. In hindsight, I see how sneaky this was. He made sure no one could see him drop that note. I picked it up. It was pretty weird, but one line in particular made my skin crawl. Wear tighter work pants for me next time. They look good. I ran into the office and sat in the front of the CCTV monitor, seeing exactly where he was. He was standing outside the building, waiting and pacing. Then he walked back into the building and on camera, I could see he was looking for me. But thankfully at this point, I was in the office, so he walked back outside, started pacing again, and waiting, before hiding himself out of sight behind a corner. I told my manager, who told me to exit via the back entrance, which I did. I was shaking, checking behind me every few seconds, every noise making me run faster until I eventually reached the safety of my home. I sat down, processing what had just happened, when suddenly my phone vibrated. Hey Anna, thanks for the chat. Talk soon. Winky face. How the hell did he get my number? I have never blocked someone faster in my life. I told the higher-ups what happened, and didn't return to work for at least a month, until he was permanently barred from my workplace. I still fear I'll see him somewhere and he'll be waiting for me. Thankfully, I haven't seen him since, and don't wish to, and I hope to never meet him again. I took on a house/pet sitting job for the weekend after my birthday. It was for a friend, and the dogs and cat are all super sweet, and I was happy to do it. I was already reeling from another scary encounter that had just happened to me on my birthday itself, so it was a welcome respite to have a mini vacation where I had a house to myself. It was the first night there. I'd come back from a family member's birthday party, and it was too early to curl my hair, so I was watching Ginny and Georgia on the living room TV. For reference, the TV was next to the front door, with the guest bathroom I was using within 3 feet. It was about 10 p.m, and I paused the show to pee. Dogs were asleep on the other side of the house, both older and one with mobility issues, and shortly after locking the door and sitting down I heard something. At first I thought I was being paranoid, as I've been through several break-ins and attempts, but then I heard the door open, and footsteps on the laminate flooring. And if you know how loud they are. Then I heard a man cough, distinctly, perhaps 15 feet from where I was. I frantically texted my mum to call the cops, thinking I should be as quiet as possible. But then when she didn't answer, I heard the footsteps coming closer. I panicked and called myself. Keep in mind, after my first situation I became very particular. When I house sit, the first thing I do is check all the windows and doors and secure all entry points, as my dad taught me this growing up. I know everything was locked, but I'm sobbing on the phone and panicking on the toilet seat, hoping the cops get here in time and that I don't end up another statistic. Then I hear the footsteps recede and the back door close. The operator informed me the cops were there, but that I'd have to come out to let them in. I've got some really bad stories, but unlocking that door and running to the front door to unlock it and basically falling outside was up there for most terrifying moment of my life. They checked the house. They didn't believe me. The back door was not particularly secure, as it's the same kind I have in my bedroom at my place. It's the kind you can turn the lock and close behind you, so of course the place looked locked up. Once again, I slept with a knife under my pillow, and I slept for maybe 45 minutes that night. I don't know who the man was who wanted to try and burgle the house, but I hope I never meet you. At the time I was 13, my friend just turned 16. We are both female. Me and my friend Amy were both bored at home, and my dad was away from the house, leaving just us there. So we wanted to go shopping in this one shop I told her about. It was getting a bit late, like maybe about 7 p.m, but we figured it could still be open. However, this shop was quite far from the house, but I knew a shortcut. That being through the woods, taking that shortcut was my biggest mistake. We left the house, and it was still fairly bright outside. We were just walking and talking and went through the woods. There's rarely anyone there, apart from maybe some old man walking his dog, and I always used to go through those woods as a child, with my parents, and I always thought of it as being safe. We mindlessly walk until I notice a man with his hood up smoking. I whisper to Amy, "Hey, look," and she grabbed my arm just to be safe, and we both went around him so he wouldn't see us, but we are pretty sure he did. The sun begins to set and we reach the shop, only to realize it's closed, so we turn back the same way we came from. We completely forget about the encounter we had about 10 minutes ago, and we just laugh and talk. I look in front of us where we're walking, and we see someone. I'm 90% sure it was the same guy, and I freeze. Amy tracks where I'm looking, and she grabs my arm again, and we go off the trail to some place that I didn't recognize. We ran for a bit, then went back on the trail thinking we lost him. We look back, He's right behind us, sprinting full speed towards us. Amy, still clinging to my arm, begins running and pulling me with her. She asks me which way should we turn, while pointing towards the woods and then pointing to some area I didn't really know how to get back home from. Now it was dark out. Obviously we wouldn't go into the woods. Without thinking, we went towards the area I didn't really recognize. We keep running, keep looking back, and he's still there. We see some lady in the distance and we immediately rush to her. My throat was so sore I could barely breathe. This lady was on her phone, just standing there, and we tell her, "We're being chased, please can we stay with you for a while?" And this woman pays us no mind, as if this is normal. At least that was the last time we saw the man. Amy tries getting her phone up, but it's dead. I got mine, but I have no data, and can't go on Google Maps to find our way home. I knew the area we were in, I just wasn't sure how to get back home from there. I look around us and we begin to walk the way I thought was right. Finally, we walked until I recognized where we were, so I led the rest of the way, still paranoid that he would be behind us. We kept looking back. In order to get back home, we were forced to go the rest of the way through the woods. I thought this was a terrible idea, but at least I wasn't alone. After all, I saw her as a big sister, and don't know what would have happened if she wasn't there. We go through the woods. I pull out my phone flashlight because at this point it's pitch dark and I'm shaking, and Amy was also tense. We eventually made it back home safely, and we never told anyone this story. We weren't even supposed to leave the house, especially as it was getting dark. This experience stayed with us. Anyway, a few months after this happened, I was watching some YouTube documentary about true crime stuff. It was based in the exact same area that I got chased. Even the images used in the video were of the literal same street we got chased on. And it was about some kid that apparently murdered his whole family over a video game. Very graphic stuff. I told my mum about it and she told me, "Didn't you know that area is dangerous? It's probably the most dangerous part of town." And I was shocked. I never shared the story of what happened to Amy and I. But after that, I did. Though I don't think she took it very seriously. To this day, I still think to myself, what would have happened if we hadn't have reacted quicker? I'm glad we never got to find out, though. I'm a 21-year-old female. I usually try not to go to the laundromat at night, but with it getting dark so early, it's basically impossible. And that was the situation tonight. I got there and was alone except for one guy smoking outside and a couple of employees cleaning stuff. Usually I sit in my car while I wait, but it's super cold so that wasn't really an option. I brought along some homework and sat in one of the chairs. The chairs are arranged in groups of 2, so I put my backpack in the seat next to me. I could see this guy staring at me through the window. There were still employees around though, so I wasn't too worried. A while later, he came in and walked around for a while. Before deciding to approach me, he told me I was being rude by taking up 2 chairs because what if he wanted to sit there? I basically told him there are other chairs and I could move to a different set if there was something special about these ones. He walked off and kept walking in circles around the building. A while later, the employees left. He came up to me again and pointed at my sweatshirt pocket and said, "You can keep that in your car, you know, you don't need it in here." What was in my pocket? Pepper spray. He was telling me to get rid of the pepper spray. I told him I didn't feel like it and would be keeping it. At this point, I was pretty eager to just get the hell out of there, and might have just gotten my car and pulled some laps around the block if it wasn't for the fact that the dryers don't lock, and I was paranoid about him going through my stuff. Luckily, he decided to go smoke again, and I escaped while he was gone. This happened to me in about 2021. There's a small bar in a small Iowa town that I absolutely adore. All the staff knew me well, and I was a frequent regular, even if I was just there to chill. I was out late one night. The tap water is bad, so I refused to drink it. If I wasn't going to drink it, I refused to give it to my cat. There's a water fountain at the park where the water is much more drinkable, So I saved some core water bottles from when I was buying normal water from the gas station and started my walk to collect water. I had to pass the bar to get there. It was a Friday night and the bar was bumping. I just had to go in again. There were some men who were there basically all the time. They were there that night. After the bar closed, I made my way to the park to collect the water. They had left before I did. The park was across the street and a block down to the right. The three of them were sitting and smoking, super drunk. They drank beer like it was water. They were sitting on some stairs on the entrance to a business directly across the street. I went to pass them and they asked, "Who are you? Are you new in town?" I didn't think much of it. It's a super small Iowa town and everyone knew everyone. I told them yes, I was in fact new in town. And they started asking personal questions, and I lied to them about everything I said. Mainly about if I had a partner, because they found me attractive. In the middle of this conversation, there was a screaming cat somewhere. It was so loud. I ended the convo and told them I really needed to go and get home to my cat, so I went into the park to get the water. It was pushing 4 a.m. at this point and it was dark. The street lights were a soft, ambient, warm orange, and there's little to no light pollution. You can barely see anything. While I was getting the water, I looked across the street and saw one of the men duck down behind a parked car like they tried to go inside of it. The car never made a noise or flash to indicate someone entered. I noted this, but didn't think too much of it. They're drunk and probably being weird. I left the park, and suddenly another one of the guys was sitting alone closer to me, away from the other two, sitting on a different set of stairs. He tried to make conversation again, but I kept walking. I again noted this, but still didn't think much of it. I didn't know where the third man was. Suddenly, the night shift cop I was acquainted to pulled up to me and asked if I was screaming for help and if the men were bothering me. I wasn't putting two and two together and told him no, but the screaming was just a cat. Several people called in that someone was screaming, but the cops were everywhere. He carried on and said to call him if I needed anything. I kept walking home. I crossed the street and slipped straight into pitch black darkness once I was back into a residential area. That was when I heard someone behind me go, "Psst." I turn around and it's the same guy by the car, doing the same thing as before. There was a third guy on the other side of the street. I walked faster. Then I heard someone clicking like they were calling a dog. It was the car guy. Then I saw the other man in the middle of the road going, "Psst." They started to walk faster towards me. It finally clicked. I bolted and took a different route, hiding in the dark and waiting for a while before running home. I never saw them again after that, which is abnormal. I also asked the bartender if they ever acted like that, and she said they hadn't. I don't know why they never came back to the bar. Maybe they did, after I moved again or something. Glad I never had to find out, though. I work full-time at a public university in the US as an office manager, and I'm enrolled into grad school at the same institution. I graduated this May. I have in-person night classes 3 days a week that start right after I get off work. My apartment is on the first floor of a complex about 10 minutes away. Over the past few months, I've had numerous bizarre occurrences around my home and workplace. The first, to my knowledge, was in September, and was something my neighbor across the hall, a very sweet older woman, told me. A man was banging on my door for around an hour just after midnight. I wasn't home. My neighbor poked her head out to ask him what was going on, and he said he was a DoorDasher with no food or bags in his hand. My neighbor watched him through the peephole and told me he tried the doorknob multiple times. As far as I know, he didn't come back, but I've also had 3 or 4 instances over this several-month period where someone knocked on my bedroom window, which have blackout curtains and are always closed, late at night, loud enough to wake me and my tiny dog, but I never saw who. A woman came to my sliding glass door about a month later, demanding to come in because her stolen device had apparently pinged in my apartment. When I refused, she called the sheriff's department. The deputy came, asked me a few questions and left, but did confirm the device was pinging my apartment. Never found out if she meant a phone or what. The woman hung out in the parking lot before leaving a few minutes later. Obviously, I'd never stolen any phone, so I was completely bewildered, and I never saw her again. In December, things came to a head when I found a plug-in GPS tracker in the OBD port under my dashboard. Car dealership where I got serviced last said they didn't use that brand, Land Air C, and yes, I have the model and serial number, and didn't perform any services that would have warranted putting it there. I called the cops, and they just wrote down a few details and left. University police were also informed since the tracker was probably placed either on campus or at my apartment. The tracker was the biggest red flag. I never checked my OBD port, so I have no idea how long it was there. I told my unit director, and he offered to subtly remove mentions of me around the office and the website, which I accepted. However, I was posted up at the office front desk for 80% of my day. This past Tuesday, right before I left for lunch, a middle-aged man came into the office wearing a hairnet, surgical mask, hoodie and sunglasses. He claimed to be a prospective student and had questions about FAFSA. He was extremely hard to understand. I directed him to the financial aid office across campus, and he kept asking questions that our office could not answer. I thought sure, fine, maybe harmless, but just not all there mentally. He walks over to our coffee machine and just starts making himself coffee. He's still there when I leave, and one of my staff watches the desk while I'm out. When I return from lunch, he's gone, but walks in after me a few minutes later and just sits in the lobby on his phone before getting up to leave almost immediately. I was off work Wednesday and Thursday and came in on Friday. I felt like giving my mostly undergrad staff a break, so gave them permission to head home early, inadvertently leaving me alone in the office. The man came back wearing the exact same clothes, mask, hairnet, sunglasses within 5 minutes of the office clearing out. Our office is technically open to the public, but isn't really public-facing, and he had no reason for being there, especially that late in the day. He came in, barely acknowledged me, and said he was going to bring back bottled water for our coffee machine and left again. I'm very creeped out by this, so I messaged my director, and he got an IT guy from the adjacent building to come over with his laptop to keep me company. I explained the situation, and he said he'd stay with me till close. He settled in my director's office just around the corner, but it still looked like I was alone. The man returns, without water, and leans against the desk trying to start a conversation with me. An IT guy comes around the corner and stands between me and him, and he quickly changes the subject and asks about financial aid again, for the 4th time in many days, before being directed away and leaving immediately. I'm strongly considering informing campus police about this. Like I said, they already knew about the tracker. I've had problems in the past during my undergrad years in a different institution with men and women being creepy towards me, but nothing to this level, and I don't know what to do. Any advice on what I should do or change would be appreciated. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, you will enjoy the free stories I've got over on Patreon dropping tomorrow for free, a collection of Let's Not Meet stories. So if that interests you, hopefully I'll see you over there tomorrow. And I'll be back on Sunday for some middle of nowhere scary stories. I'd like to give one big thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. Your support really does go a hell of a long way, so thank you. But for now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.